Hello, and welcome once again to Age of Wonders Planetfall. I'm back with the third video, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about today. I want to eventually do a tactical battles video, but the problem with that is I don't really know of a great way to do it. Um, the AI in this game is actually pretty okay in the tactical battles, but it's still not a human. And I just don't know if I'll be able to practically show some of the things you may have to worry about with the human, just because I don't trust the AI to be a big enough threat that they'll come into play. The other thing to mention about the tactical battles that makes it really hard is all the races are so different, and even within a race, depending on what units you favored, your strategy or your tactics may be so different that it's hard to have rules of thumb for the tactical side of things, just because it's so different. Um, but maybe someday in the future I'll try. Maybe I'll have to do like a by race tactics or something like that. But for today, we're going to talk about something that is much less interesting, although it is very important, and that is going to be morale and maybe some advanced city strategy, and how to utilize your cities and some of the stuff that people may not have realized from just their first couple casual playthroughs of the game. Um, and actually, that'll be easier to talk about. So let's start with that. Um, Again, most people know how to build units, or at least I'm hoping if you got to this video, you know how to build units and you know how to build production. You may occasionally forget that there's this third tab hiding here of sector production, which shows you specific buildings that you might have from a landmark. It shows you your exploitation. It shows you certain buildings that pop up based off of your sector exploitation. Um, Someday I hope that they'll collapse some of these tabs and make it a little cleaner, that you've got 3 tabs that you have to worry about building stuff. Um, but most people probably use these 3 tabs. It's these last 2 tabs that maybe get bypassed a little bit. This one we talked about a little bit in our previous video about optimizing, or the fact that you could do colonist management and optimization. Um, I won't actually talk too much about that because my general philosophy is whatever you think you need at the time, hit the arrow. And other than that, that's basically it. I'm sure there is, if you have all the time in the world to think about it, you can probably really optimize and min-max this, but I really, in simultaneous turns, I find it's not necessary. Something that is occasionally necessary and that people may not even know you can do is food sharing. This is a mechanic whereby you can have one city make a whole ton of food. For instance, this city, I can pop all my food. And then in another city, gotta go back. And when it makes all this food and I don't want the city to grow, perhaps, I can just say, nope, share all your food, or share part of your food. And then I can go to another city that I might want to grow really fast and say, take whatever's out there. This is rarely necessary, but it is occasionally fun and useful to do. It is time consuming, probably a little more so in simultaneous turns than it generally would deserve, but it's more useful, I think, to prevent cities from growing if you think there's going to be a happiness problem, which, again, we'll get to that. That'll be the second part of this video, is happiness, morale, and all the effects. But as far as the food sharing, it's a thing you can do if you didn't know about it. In single player, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff you can do. You can really have cities that are optimized for food and share and feed your entire nation. But in simultaneous turns, it's mostly a way to prevent cities from growing. You can also get a little bit of gold from selling the excess. Note that this isn't efficient. There's a 40% wastage. You can reduce that with some buildings. Typically, that's not worth it. Most of the sector exploitation buildings are a really slow and bad return on your investment, and they're almost never worth it in multiplayer. The other button here that maybe people don't know or really have to use is martial law for rioters. Again, this ties into morale and happiness, which is one of the reasons why I tied that topic together with advanced city management. But basically what this button lets you do is if you have a bunch of rioters, which are unhappy citizens that they still cost a food upkeep, but and they still fill a slot in your colonist management, but they don't produce what you would normally get from that, right? So normally each colonist is 5. It would be 0, which can be significant. So if you do have happiness problems, you can click the martial law button. There is a downfall to it. It changes rioters to normal people for every 20 for every, I have to get my numbers right. Every 3 turns, but there's a chance you just lose the unit and your colony is just not as good. The general rule of thumb is before you get to needing to use martial law, you should have stopped the growth of the city, or you should have a happiness building to fix it, or you should just never get a rioter is what you want. But it can happen, and this is a nice little emergency button to fix it. The last tab here is also worth talking about because while much of what's in here is not especially pertinent, you don't really care about locations, you don't care about features, you should know who owns it, you should know what race it is. This is the one that lets you raise the city, which may be useful if you think you're going to lose it. If you took a city that from an enemy that you thought you were going to be able to hold, but turns out you can't, you may want to raise it. Change colony name is also a fun one if you want to use swear words. But the real important thing of this is you can disband and destroy colony structures. That is not a common thing to have to do, but if you're in a multiplayer game and it's going a little long and you realize that you have way more of or huge excess of some resource and you need to switch to something else, you can disband your central structure, it takes a turn, and then rebuild a new one. So that's a way to get resources. It's slow, it's inefficient, but sometimes you just are in a panic and you have to do it. And it's hidden here, right? So it's not obvious that you can disband buildings and do that. So I wanted to mention it just in case there was anybody that didn't already know that that was a thing you can do. So on to the other topic, which is morale. And morale is much of the system is a carryover from Age of Wonders 3. Not all of it, there are some differences. And it's a very important mechanic that is very confusing and not well described in the archives. So that's why I think it deserves the better part of an entire video just for that discussion. People that have played Age of Wonders 3 may recall a race called the Halflings, which were kind of the masters of morale. Their whole race mechanic was built around morale effects. A lot of people didn't like them. I thought they were very powerful, flexible, and unique. And I think the difference is that I played enough multiplayer that I understood morale, and a lot of the people that complained didn't. And so they just never understood how to use that race. There isn't any equivalent race yet in Planetfall that utilizes morale in anywhere near that sort of fashion, but that doesn't mean it's not a influential mechanic of the game, or that it's not an important consideration to make. So, I've been saying morale. That's probably not the right nomenclature I should be using because there's 3 different places that morale or a morale-like effect take place. Actually, no, let me correct that. There's 4 different places. One is with your units. Your units have a built-in morale value, which is actually called morale. The second place is in your cities. They have a happiness, and this is actually an income. It can be positive or minus, and that can have an effect. The third place is your popular support. This has wide-ranging effects across your entire empire. And the fourth place that there is a morale-like effect
Operations
is
available for
in
priming.
your race, or actually all races have a morale and relationship with you. which directly affects your morale. So of all these 4 different places, each one of those 4 separate morale or morale-like effects does a different thing. Most of them are interrelated in some way, and all of them are kind of hard to find or know that they even make a difference. Let's start with the lowest level, the actual morale effect per unit and what that does. Morale per unit is on a sliding scale that has different effects for values from positive 600 to minus 600, but can have values beyond those extremes. Which means if you have a value above 600 or below minus 600, it's no better or worse than what you would have had, but if you have some offsetting value, you may still be at the worst it can possibly be. What morale gives you? High morale gives you extra critical chance. Low morale gives you a fumble chance. Critical chance, if you land a crit, it's an automatic hit, and it is a separate roll from your normal 2 hit, so it's very good. A crit that hits also does an extra, I believe, 50% damage. And there are many mods that can affect your crit chance independent of your morale. So even though morale is a large influencer of your critical chance, it's not the only one. But if you stack crit mods and stack morale, you can really start getting a high chance to crit and do significantly more damage than you might expect otherwise. I want to make sure I'm getting this right from Planetfall versus Age of Wonders 3, but I believe in Planetfall, morale steps by every... Most things that affect morale are by the 100, or the 200, and I think each new value is every 200. Let me see if that's in the... nope, it's not. Yes, it is. So it is every 200. Notice that the critical plus chance is less than the critical minus chance as you scale higher or lower. So having a really high positive morale is not as good as inflicting a really low negative morale. There's also a hidden mechanic where a critical chance is a guaranteed hit, does 50% extra damage, or a fumble chance is a guaranteed miss, meaning you do 0 damage. So a fumble is also worse to have than a critical is good to have. Probably. The other mechanic here that shows up aside from critical or fumble is a especially unhappy unit has a chance to desert your army, which means it just leaves. That's obviously very bad, especially if it's a high veterancy unit or a high tier unit. Just having one leave without you being able to do anything about it is a lot of experience, a lot of cosmite, a lot of gold that you've just lost. So the long and the short of it is morale is good to have, and it's hard to gauge if it's better or worse than other things to have. My general rule of thumb, and I haven't thoroughly tested this to know for sure, but usually I figure that morale is good if you can get it on a hero ability, which the Amazon have one. They have it on Animal Discipline. Gives you mounted units plus 200. So morale is good on that. It's good if you have a Doctrine. There's a couple Doctrines that are frankly just broken. I think the Warmonger Doctrine is extremely good. That's 400 free morale for any player versus player fight. A mod that gives morale, I typically would not take. I think it's probably okay, but there's often a better choice. As an example, on my Lancers here, I have the Primal Awareness Amplifier, the Grounding Harness, and the Phase Walk Modulator. I did not add the Advanced Instinct Controller, even though it gives 300 morale. I've been deeming that not as good as cannot be flanked 10% harder to hit, stagger resistance, and or 20% harder to hit, and phase field. But again, that's my personal rule of thumb. I can't guarantee that. There are many ways that morale, if you stack enough of it, it can be very powerful. Going up a level from unit morale, let's go to city happiness. As I mentioned before, this is actually an income. Happiness or unhappiness is accumulated in and after a certain breakpoint, which is based off of the size of the city and scales on the size of the city. You have an event pop. Unhappiness events are more likely to happen the larger the city is. I'm not sure about happiness events. Happiness event becomes less likely the larger the city is, which is what I thought it was, but I wanted to double check. A happiness event is just you get 100% extra of something. I believe that something is randomized between food, energy production, and research. I don't think I do not believe, I could be wrong, but I do not believe it is like the highest one that you produce in that city. I believe it's just, it rolls it at random. Unhappiness events turn have the chance, I think. Maybe it's guaranteed. I never get them, so I don't know. They can turn city population into rioters, which, as I said, are bad. Usually, my rule of thumb on happiness is you want to have enough of it that your city is not generating unhappiness, but you don't need to try to stack it and force happiness events. Happiness events are very good, but for a larger city, they're pretty expensive to get, and happiness is lowered based off of the number of citizens you already have, so it's hard to get it to stack high. And for smaller cities, while it's significantly easier to get, your income values are a lot lower as well, so the effect you get from a happiness event is appropriately lower. If you have enough happiness that you're at least a slight positive, you will slowly get happiness events, and that's probably good enough. Going up another level, let's go to race. Let's consider that the next highest level. So this is called a race relation, but as you'll note, the main benefits you get from it are with happiness. You get opinion from players of that race, but a multiplayer that's insignificant. That doesn't matter because everyone else, you can't change the opinion of the human that you're playing against. You get energy and influence cost reduction for race events. That's cool. Racial colonists get extra happiness, so the more that your race is happy, the easier it is to keep a positive happiness income, so you can maybe switch colonists away from producing happiness. Plus, you just get those generically good events, and then you also get a racial unit morale boost. You'll note that there's a whole bunch of modifiers that affect this, whereas with units, most things that modify it are either going to be a mods or a status inflict or a tactical operation. And with cities, cities are influenced mostly by the other happiness types. The race relations are influenced by owning a bunch of colonies of one race, peacefully observing colonies of a race, and if you're in a single-player environment or maybe a play-by-email with AI players, playing nice with a player that is of that race. Ways to lower race relation is to declare war on a player of that race, to destroy a city of that race, to migrate a city of that race to another type of race. I think that's it. There might be other ones I don't remember. In general, though, race relations tend to figure themselves out. There's not, in Age of Wonders 3, right now, this is your main advantage to only founding colonies of your starting race and to migrate colonies you conquer to your starting race. By boosting race relations, you get kind of the smorgasbord of advantages, and that's the reason why you would want to focus that way. The theoretical offset to this is if you have different races, you have access to those races' tech tree. I find in the multiplayer games, that I play, which, as I've said in previous videos, 1v1 simultaneous turns, the games tend to be too fast, and you don't really have enough options that you can reasonably conquer or get a neutral city, and then tech into any particularly useful mods. It's just pretty hard to do in general. So almost always your best option is to play nice with your own race, play like a dick against races that are not your own race, and migrate them as much as you can. The next layer up from that is popular support. And popular support, you'll notice mine is negative right now because I declared without a cast a spell ally and my AI opponent, specifically to show what some effects of popular support are. Popular support is almost solely affected by declaring war and overall diplomacy in multiplayer games. For my games, 1v1, we start as a team because we don't want anybody to have to eat the popular support penalty. In larger games, you may actually have to worry about if you have a cast a spell ally on whoever it is you want to attack, because popular support is actually nasty. Notice I'm at minus 200 disapproving, 10% unit upkeep. That ranges from not a huge deal when you don't have a lot of units to a huge deal with a lot. Even right now, what do I have? I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, 10 units, but 2 of them heroes and don't cost upkeep. So I've got 8 units. That's 8, 16. This is an 8 cost as well, I think. Well, this is the easy way to do it. My 8 cost upkeep units now cost 9. My 4 cost upkeep units now cost 5. So every unit I have right now is at least 1 gold more expensive than it is otherwise, which is a big deal. Second thing I have is minus 100 unit morale, which is, again, fumbles are worse to have than criticals are good to get. So negative morale is awful. You definitely want to avoid that as much as you can. Finally, colony happiness income, which again is less of a big deal in general. Or at least it is in the earlier game when city sizes tend to be smaller and happiness is easier to get. All you probably need is the happiness building, the recreational dome. That should be good enough for most cities in most locations, all the way up to size 12 or so. It's usually fine. Positive popular support comes from being declared war on. You can also get it from declaring war with a cost of spell ally, and there's probably other ways to get it that I don't remember right now. The effects of positive popular support, I believe, are just the opposite of a negative popular support, but you'll note that this doesn't give the exact numbers in the archives here. The point being that this is a mechanic that is not really described. If you only play single player, only play the tutorial, it doesn't really come up. Same thing with city happiness and unhappiness. You can easily play a game and not really realize what it's doing for you. Unit morale is one that it's easy to not understand why you're missing all your hits or why you're getting a whole bunch of crits for some reason. And race relations is one that it's really hard to, like, you have to go to a whole screen, and not only do that, you have to actually click on these and hover to figure out what it's actually doing for you. And all of these mechanics, many of them, as I said, influence one another. Specifically, race relations affects just about everything, as does popular support affects both of the other two, the city and unit ones that matter. And even though right now in the game there's nobody that really is able to manipulate these really well or do a whole bunch of differences, there is one notable exception of a race that does have a very significant impact on morale, or concerning morale. It's unfortunately not the Amazons that I'm playing right now. I just picked them because this was the game that I was playing in the previous video. It's a Syndicate. And the Syndicate... indentured. And the reason the Syndicate are affected by morale is because the indentured have cerebral control collars and are immune to all morale effects. Their morale is always 0. They will get no positives and no negatives from morale, which can either be very good or very bad. depending. Mostly for the Syndicate, it's good. They don't have a lot of ways that they want to or can stack morale. Um, Other races maybe would have a bigger issue because, like, for instance, the Amazons, they have that plus morale boost on their heroes, and they may not want to have everything be locked at 0. They may often or be aiming to get the high morale critical boost on everything. So that's the only notable one I can think of off the top of my head. In the future, maybe they'll release something equivalent to the halflings, my little dirty fat boys, but we'll see. Maybe not. That might be years out, even if they do. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about in the video? How long have we gone? 25 minutes. No, I don't think so. I think I'll just leave this one short for today, and try to consider maybe what I'll do for a tactical combat discussion in the future. Like I said, I may have to kind of go race by race because many of them have a very different idea of what they normally want to do. And I am by no means an expert in all of them, and in general, I would say my strategic game is probably better than my tactical game. And the really unfortunate thing I find is that for all this discussion about the strategic game, and the general perspective that Age of Wonders is kind of a Civilization meets XCOM, I feel the proper description of this game is actually that it's XCOM meets Civilization, and that the tactical side is a way bigger deal. It's more fun, more interesting decisions than the strategic side, and that the strategic side is really just a long series of decisions to get the payoff of the tactical fight, and you can see if your strategic decisions were what you needed to win that tactical fight. So I will definitely try to do some sort of show-off of tactical one. If I do it by race, I'm not going to do everybody because I just frankly don't have the experience with all of them. I probably would limit it to Amazons, probably Syndicate, probably Vanguard, um, maybe Assembly just because I played against them so much. But I haven't really played enough Kyoko or Devour yet to be able to make solid judgments and what I think their race-specific tactical decisions might be. Other than that, thanks again for watching a shorter video, but again, hopefully one that taught you some stuff if you weren't able to find it in the archives or really have no idea that these things exist. And as always, enjoy Planetfall.